It is somehow week one of the 2026 MLS season. No, I absolutely cannot believe it either, as we start a very, very big year in American soccer. Are the Fire going to be good? How good? Is there any point to this season because Miami's going to run away with the whole thing? Well, clearly I think there's a point to talking about it because I'm here and you are too. Let's get to it on CHGO Fire. Hello, happy belated Valentine's Day, happy Lunar New Year to you all. Welcome to this edition of CHGO Fire. I'm Alex Campbell. Thanks for joining us live on YouTube. Already got a few people in the chat. Thanks for listening wherever you get your podcasts. And yes, week one of the 2026 MLS season, the 31st season of Major League Soccer is upon us. The Fire preparing for Saturday's trip to take on the Houston Dynamo to kick off their 2026, and things will get underway this Saturday with, checks my notes, Charlotte FC against St. Louis City, because why would that not be the headline matchup to kick things off in a match week that also includes LAFC against Miami? Welcome to MLS, everybody. It doesn't make any sense, but the preseason is over. The Fire are back from Coachella. They've brought some of the warmth back to Chicago this week, hit over 60 degrees here in the city yesterday. For those of you who don't live in the area, it was quite something, and they'll look ahead to the warmth of Houston, Texas this weekend. Not a bad way to start the season when you are playing in mid-February. Do want to remind everybody, you no longer need that extra subscription on Apple TV. MLS Season Pass is dead. May it never return. If you have Apple TV, you get all the games. It's really simple on that front. No second subscription this season. So hopefully there's people who, didn't see it in their budget the last couple of years to get the Apple MLS deal. Hopefully it's a bit more affordable now and more people can check out those games, especially given that the Fire don't totally suck anymore and are actually interesting to watch. As we get going here, first, let's just recap the preseason. Today's mostly going to be about looking forward, but I do at least want to touch on, let's remember how this went. So they started with the trip down to Florida. They took on Nashville SC and Sporting KC. They won both of those games. We had goals from David Pareba, Anton Saletros, and Philip Zinkernagel against Nashville. They then beat Sporting KC 1-0 on a goal by Jonathan Bamba that was just very generously gifted to them by Rafael Vicky's Sporting Kansas City. They took on Indy 11 in a closed-door friendly here in Chicago. We don't know what happened. They posted a couple pictures. No score, no nothing. No one saw it, so did it even happen? You be the judge. Then they went to the Coachella Valley Invitational down in Southern California, knocked off LA Galaxy 3-2 with goals from Kuipers, Zinkernagel, and Chris Mueller. They then drew Austin FC. They scored on two corners, one by Andrew Gutman, one by Jack Elliott. And then they lost 4-3 to the Portland Timbers with goals from Mueller, Robin Lod, and Marin Haile Selassie to round out their preseason slate. So a few takeaways from the Fire's preseason, or at least what we were able to see of it. Mostly positive, I think, because you don't want to hit the panic button in preseason. There's only so much you can learn out of these games. Only a chunk of the minutes are being played by the starting lineups or like groups of guys who are even going to be on a field together at any given time in MLS play. So again, I think you have to be able to mostly look optimistic at this stage of things. Mbekazeli Mboazi, new South African center back, looks kind of short out there, but he looks really comfortable. Again, short for a center back. It's kind of grading on a curve. I think he's listed at 6 foot or 6'1". I'm not quite sure about that, but if you can play the position well and it's not something that's an obvious hindrance, then it's not a big deal. It also helps that you have 6'5" Jack Elliott playing next to him, and it looks like that's going to be the starting combo. So the Fire, not short of height in the back line. Speaking of the back line, sure looks like Leo Barroso is going to be the starter at right back. With all due respect to Jonathan Dean, who played a much bigger role last season than he was supposed to, and I thought did pretty well and got a lot of applause from all sorts of people. Barroso has gotten the wealth of the minutes in preseason. He has started almost every preseason game. He's back. He's fit and healthy. It sure looks like Barroso is going to be in a really good position to, make that his own this season. And we'll see what he can do because, again, it was really unfortunate that he really never got going in 2025. Looks like the Fire, and this is kind of maybe related to the fullback situation, looks like the Fire are going to be playing more of a 4-2-3-1 than a 4-3-3. Now, our formation's kind of made up. Sure, they change in different phases of play, but from what we saw in preseason, it sure looks like it's going to be more of a double pivot with Jay Davila and Anton Soletros playing alongside each other, and Soletros providing, some passing range from deep with that left foot of his. Not really Davila's specialty. He's showed an ability to play some really good long diagonals, but in terms of quick interplay in the center of the park in crowded spaces, that seems to be more of Soletros' game. And I do wonder if this is in part because you've got Andrew Gutman on the left and Leo Barroso on the right, both of whom are guys who want to get forward and want to attack. And so if both your fullbacks are getting high, you can't just leave the two center backs back there and then maybe one defensive mid and expect them to cover all of that space. I saw, Matt in the chat asking, with Wagner and Alba gone, is Andrew Gutman the best left back in the league? I think Gutman had a really, really good first 80% of last year and then kind of a rough last 20. I mostly chalk that up to the fact that he played more minutes last year than literally any other season in his career by a lot. So I think he just kind of ran out of gas late on. There's been a lot of people around MLS circles really hyping up Andrew Gutman this preseason. Matt Doyle, formerly now of MLSsoccer.com, and now you should go support what he's doing over on his Ghost newsletter. He's got Gutman as his projected best 11 left back in MLS this year. I've seen a couple other lists that have him as somewhere in the top 5 defenders in the league. Again, I don't know if I'm that high on him, but I think the potential is there for this season for the Fire fullbacks to really be involved and really be involved in the attack. And I think we're going to see Andrew Gutman pumping a whole bunch of crosses from that left side. To leave a note on the midfield situation, does that change when Andre Franco comes back? Kind of hard to say. That's likely not till after the World Cup. And then you have to ask the question, is Franco battling for time with Soletros in that deeper position? Is he battling with Robin Lod or Philip Zinkernagel to play in that 10 role? Again, I think we can't say now, and the fact that there will be options in theory for Greg Berhalter and that he will have more than 3, definitively MLS starting caliber central midfielders available to him, that's the thing the Fire haven't been able to say in basically forever. And so, the idea of having guys competing for positions, I think, is a very tantalizing prospect, and we will cross that bridge when we get there. On that note, man, is there going to be a lot of competition for minutes in the wide areas. 4-3-3, 4-2-3-1, either way. Jonathan Bamba, Philip Zinkernagel, Robin Lod, Chris Mueller, Marin Haile Selassie, Omari Glasgow, though he has played mostly fullback and wingback in preseason. And then you've got kids like David Pareba and Dylan Borso, who they've got first-team contracts. Looks like they're going to be depth, and probably mostly guys we'll see in Open Cup games. But there is competition for places in this Fire team this season, with Chris Mueller coming back healthy in particular, with the addition of a guy like Lod who can play literally anywhere on the pitch seemingly. Again, it's not going to be a team this year where we can say right now, hey, these are going to be the first, these are going to be the first 11 every single week if they're healthy. That's not the kind of Fire roster we are walking into this season. The Fire do need Ugo Kuipers to be healthy. It's been tough because, he sustained a concussion midway through preseason. He missed the last 2 preseason games. We really won't know how his status looks for Saturday until we hear from Greg Berhalter on Thursday in his Matchday -2 press conference. I assume that whether it's Joe Chatz, Alex Calabrese, Tim Hotze, whoever from the media crew, I assume that is question 1 on Thursday is what is Kuiper's status, because, Jason Shukaluk, unproven, young. We saw Chris Mueller get a run at the 9. We've seen Lod and Zinkernagel play high centrally. If there's no Kuipers, I don't think Shukaluk starts. I think it's probably, hey, Chris Mueller or Marin Haile Selassie gets thrown out there, and then they just figure out what way to arrange all of those guys in a way that makes most sense. Did want to quickly note, I mentioned that Glasgow has mostly played fullback and wingback. sure looks like he's Andrew Gutman's backup at this point. Jonathan Dean is going to back up Barroso on the right. And Victor Radojevic, has played very little soccer, has trained very little with the Fire. And so I don't think we can reasonably expect to see him get anything that looks like meaningful minutes for quite a while. My assumption would be that Glasgow is a guy who comes in as fresh legs, maybe if you're chasing the game in some situations, or the Fire. And we saw them tinker with this. I think it's more likely that if the Fire want to get more defensive, you won't sub off someone like Gutman. You'll sub on a third center back, and then maybe you can bring in Glasgow for either Gutman or Barroso if he doesn't have quite as much defending to do. He's not a guy you'd want out there defending a lead, I don't think, defending one-on-one. All of this is to say the Fire need to be better defensively this year. There were moments in preseason where that looked good. I think it might be a little shaky to start the year. Again, Mboazi and Elliott, if that is the pairing, they're going to take some time to develop some chemistry. And we'll have to see what Greg Berhalter's tolerance for that is, because, well, I think everybody expects Mboazi to have a just monumentally high ceiling. That Elliott-Waterman pairing sets a really nice floor, and I think there's going to be some temptation, like we saw with Jay Davila last year. It was kind of sink or swim for him, and he sank for a while, and then got, very clearly better as the season went on. It would not be surprising if we saw Mboazi have some growing pains early and then say, around May or June, really start looking like the, MLS best 11 caliber prospect that, he is expected to be. So I think we might have to give that time. To cap off this whole series of comments, though, let's take a look at a projected depth chart for the Chicago Fire, because I said I think there's going to be a lot of change, but I think this kind of writes itself. At this point, we've got these starters in bold and caps, and this is largely what I think Greg Berhalter is going to do, not what I like exactly how I would set it up. Based on preseason, this is what we're seeing. The one big question being Zinkernagel and Laud, who plays centrally, who plays wide right. We saw a lot of rotation from those guys in the preseason, and we saw some really, really nice passing between Laud, Zinkernagel, Saletros, Barroso, even Haile Selassie when he was out there. I think the right side of the Fire's attack is going to be doing a lot of work in terms of progressing the ball. Because on the left side, Gutman, what you're getting there. You're getting a guy who's going to stay wide, and he is just going to make runs up and down that left sideline. Matt made a comment in the chat, because I didn't mention this guy earlier. Puso Ditejane, the other South African winger, he's going to be in there for minutes too, it sure looks like. And again, we haven't seen basically any of that guy play in preseason. He got a little bit in preseason, but there's not a lot of tape from him in South Africa. So again, he's thought very highly of. The Fire have a lot of wingers, but I think he is a player that underscores the Fire are just a deeper team this year. If you go back to last season, a guy coming in like Ditejane on the team last year, you would have expected him to play quite a bit, especially given Mueller's absence. That's a guy you would have expected to get frequent sub minutes, and he's going to be battling for even that. I mean, this is a guy who's going to be battling to make the bench when this team is fully fit. So, again, the Fire are a deeper team this year, and I think that's why there's pretty reasonable optimism, though I think Fire fans, I don't think everybody's used to this, the fact that there's expectations. Major League Soccer does its annual polling of variety of media members to ask how they think teams will do. And the Fire's net result was 5th place in the Eastern Conference. We'll get to this later and what my projections are. That feels about right. But again, this team is expected to take a step forward this year. And the main reason for that is because they are deeper. I mentioned, I'm thinking about position battles. Jonathan Bamba, he's got to take a step forward this year. And I think the expectation is he will after, coming in last season and not getting a break, really. He's been dealing with some injuries in preseason, so is he fit to go on Saturday? Do we see Chris Mueller starting a game to start 2026, which from a storyline perspective and personally for Chris would be really awesome, given that, there was doubts at times last year if he was ever going to play soccer again. So that's, really, really important. If Kuipers can't go, does Shukaluk get a chance this week? Is he given a chance in general? Or is it kind of musical chairs with the other attackers? And, how did the Fire's kids, like the really young guys in this team, develop this year? Now, I mentioned Pareba and Borso earlier. It's hard to see a path to minutes for those guys, but doesn't look like they're going anywhere. Vitaly Hlut got some preseason minutes late in preseason. I don't think there's any expectation that he's going to be getting first team opportunities. He's likely to be, a star of the show on Fire 2 this year, but the fact that he's been training at least with the first team in preseason says a lot about what Greg Berhalter thinks of him. Christopher Kupps, center back. Where does he fit in the depth chart? We saw not that much of him in preseason. Again, with Elliott, Mboazi, Waterman, those are going to be the guys who get the wealth of the minutes. And can Kupps continue to develop if he's not getting regular week in, week out game time? Before I get to my overall MLS predictions, I do want to predict a few things for the Fire, and we're going to go through this pretty quickly because I don't really have any hot takes here because I think this team, we know a lot about them. The only team in Major League Soccer who are returning more minutes from last year than the Fire are the Seattle Sounders, who are literally just going to almost throw the exact same team out there that they played for most of last year. And so, that's also pretty standard for them. So the Fire, really with the exception of Brian Gutierrez, they're going to be bringing back almost all the minutes they saw played in league play last year. So I've got Ugo Kuipers as the Fire's Golden Boot winner. This isn't a sexy pick at all. If he's healthy, if this team is good, there's no reason Kuipers can't score 20 goals this season. And, Zinkernagel is not going to put up quite the numbers he did last year. That's just not reasonable. And I think the goals are going to be a bit more spread out on this team. So, and hey, even if Robert Lewandowski shows up in August, he's not going to outscore Kuipers on this season as a whole. I don't think, as fun as it would be for Lewandowski to come in and score 2 goals a game, I don't even think Ugo Kuipers would have a problem with that. Newcomer of the year, I'm going with Anton Saletros. I just think he gives this team a midfield balance and a veteran leadership it really lacked at times last year. I've talked about this before, when you would often have a midfield of Davila, Orehel, and Gutierrez. There's not a lot of, steel in there. There's not a lot of veteran experience. And so I think Saletros is going to help this team be more confident, more balanced. And I think, he's one of these guys who, even if he isn't the club captain, he's a guy who has been captaining the biggest club in Sweden for years. So that's a guy bringing leadership qualities that the Fire, I don't think had enough of last season. And so I think both on and off the field, I think he's going to be really, really valuable. Defender of the year, I've got Andrew Gutman because, again, I'm maybe not as high on him as some people, but I think this positions him to have a really big year and maybe a career best year this season. And this isn't a slight on anybody else. I just think the Fire are going to be better defensively, and he's going to do a lot on the attacking end, and that gets you that nod. Most improved, I think Jay Davila is going to just keep going up. I think based on what we saw last year, we saw the potential he's got. I thought he looked really assured in possession from what we saw of him in preseason. I just think he's a guy who's getting more comfortable with his height and, pairing his athleticism with his size as still such a young player. I think he's going to really impress people this season. I think this is going to be maybe overblown, but I won't be surprised if you hear some Sergio Busquets in MLS kind of comps. I think, he's more athletic than Busquets was playing in MLS, and he's not going to quite be the brain that Busquets is because no one in the world is. But I do think you're going to see Davila really get attention from around the league. Young player of the year, I've put Mboazi here. Again, I think maybe there's some growing pains at the front end, but the talent is absolutely there. Greg Berhalter clearly believes in him. He's going to go to the World Cup with South Africa if he's fit. And obviously, that's going to be a really big deal. And so, no, I think he's going to be a guy who gets attention as the year goes on, like a lot of Fire players, especially in the younger end. And I think he's this year's Davila. I think he's the guy with even higher expectations who by the end of the year, everyone's looking around and saying, oh, yeah, now we understand why the Fire were competing with big teams in Europe to sign this guy. He is the real deal. And then briefly, I've got Chris Brady for Homegrown of the Year because this is like the hottest take I'm going to have today. I think Chris Brady goes to the World Cup. I think Chris Brady is going to win that third spot on the U.S. roster because I think the Fire are going to be a better defensive team this year. I think they're going to be a better overall team this year. And, we saw Mauricio Pochettino show up to watch Chris Brady at a preseason game in Florida. I mean, so that, that's not a trip that Pochettino's taking lightly, to take time out of his schedule to just go to some random park in Florida to go watch a preseason game. So I think he's clearly thought highly of. in the U.S. setup. Matt Freese, if he's healthy, is going to go. Matt Turner, if he's healthy, is going to go. And my pick right now is I think Chris Brady is going to be that third goalkeeper. So that's kind of where my homegrown of the year honors for Chris Brady have, that's where I put that. Okay, let's look really big picture and going to give my 2026 predictions for the MLS standings. And again, I mentioned earlier that the Fire are kind of, fifth was MLSsoccer.com's pick. Look at quickly and I've got some overall predictions too for like trophies and whatnot. But I've got Inter Miami topping the league, topping the Eastern Conference. Not an interesting pick, certainly. They're really deep this season. They look like they're going to be great. They have Messi. And so if we look here at the Eastern Conference, I've got Miami 1. Nashville, they were a really good team last year. They are the recipients of the award for San Jose being stupid and forgetting that there was a date they had to re-sign their best player by. Whoops. And Christian Espinoza now plays for Nashville. I think they're going to score a hilarious amount of goals. I think they're probably going to be the highest scoring team in MLS this season. BJ Callahan just got a new contract. I think they're going to be really fun. And then I think 3 through 7 is a giant blob. Cincinnati, I've got the Fire in 4th, Columbus 5th, Charlotte 6th, Philly 7th. Those are all just good, solid teams, and the Eastern Conference is an absolute gauntlet. So for me, I think I could put teams 3 through 7 in any order, which is to say, if the Fire finished 7th, would that be disappointing? Yes. I don't think it would be bad. Matt in the chat says NYCFC too low. I don't know. They have lost a lot of firepower and have signed kind of nobody. I just don't trust them. They're kind of all that middle tier in the East. Orlando, Red Bull, Atlanta, NYCFC. Those are all teams that comfortably make the playoffs in the West, but I just don't think they're there. And then New England, I don't know what they're doing at all. Marko Mitrovic in his first season as a MLS head coach. I'm excited for him. Guy with a lot of Chicago roots, wish him well. Toronto FC seems to have bet the farm on signing Josh Sargent, and Norwich City has said we are in no way interested in that. And now Josh just isn't playing any soccer and is probably killing his World Cup chances in the process. Georgi Mihailovic can't do it all by himself. DC United got rid of the only guy who scored any goals for them last year. Good luck with that. And Miguel jokes that CF Montreal isn't low enough. I would put them lower than 15th if I could, but I don't actually have them winning the wooden spoon this year as we go over to the Western Conference because holy hell are Sporting Kansas City going to be bad. Good luck to Rafael Vicky, former Fire manager. They only have like 14 senior players. I'm not kidding. They only have like 14 actual professional soccer players on their roster. It's too bad because they got some great kits this year, but that team is going to be garbage. On the other end of things, I think it's going to be a lot of familiar faces. I've got Vancouver topping the West because if Ryan Gauld is even kind of healthy, him, Mueller, and Brian White are going to be just an attacking dynamo and put up goals for fun. They've lost a couple pieces, but again, I think I trust Vancouver to do some really good things. San Diego FC, year 2, they were stunning in year 1. I think they're probably going to be a little wiser this season, a little more balanced. They've moved up in a lot of people's not a lot of people's estimation. I guess they've proven they're worth it. They've brought Lewis Morgan in, former Red Bull winger, Scottish player who's dealt with a ton of injuries, but if he's healthy, that's a huge boost. Their biggest struggle might be keeping Manu Dua longer than June, 20-year-old left-sided center back who looked awesome for them last year. Probably only going to be better. I think he's a best 11 player if he's here all season. I think it's incredibly likely, though, that San Diego are selling him to Europe for like $15 million in the summer. So something to keep an eye on. Seattle, they're Seattle. They're going to be good. They've got De Rosario at striker, who's a little unproven, but he's going to get all the chances in the world. They've sold, and I'm blanking at a really bad time, young player from Alaska, whose name I can't remember at the moment right now, to Atletico Madrid in midfield. And, they've brought in Hassani Dotson, MLS veteran, to fill that spot. I think they're going to probably be fine there. Jordan Morris, if he can stay healthy, he's really solid. Obed Vargas is the name I couldn't come up with there, who's now joined Atletico Madrid. LAFC, they've got Son, they've got Bouanga. I just don't think those two. I think fitting of being in LA, I think that team is going to be a soap opera this season. I think we've already seen Bouanga try to back channel a move out. Inter Miami throwing a $15 million bid in for just, I think, shits and giggles, as far as I could tell. It's weird. They've got Son playing striker. He's not really a 9. They've brought in Jacob Schaffelberg on the other wing. I don't know how that's going to work. They've made some really interesting signings. I like the Stefano Eustachio signing, the Canadian midfielder, a whole lot. But I just think there's too much there, and that it's going to be messy. New coach, they'll be dangerous, but yeah, I'm not sold. I like Galaxy, no Ricky Puig, but they make more sense. San Jose Earthquakes, I think the Timo Werner signing is going to be awesome. I don't know what the hell else they're doing. RSL, young, interesting, we'll see. But, I mean, as you go down the rest of the West, like, the Western Conference bottom half is not good. The bottom half of the West, none of them would sniff the top 7 of the East, I don't think. A lot of teams have made really confusing decisions. FC Dallas are hoping Petar Musa scores 1 billion goals and makes up for the fact that the rest of their team is bad. Austin FC have spent a ton of money on an attack that doesn't fit together. Colorado just sold their homegrown and potential captain, Cole Bassett, for no apparent reason to Portland. As I mentioned, Sporting Kansas City is going to be awful. That's just kind of what it is. Minnesota United, I think, are a really intriguing team to watch this season. Eric Ramsey, their coach who refused to play actual soccer, he now coaches West Brom in the championship, which is the most anti-soccer league in the world, so that's a great fit. But they're going to actually try to play the sport this season, I would think. So that's going to be interesting to watch. They've lost Dane St. Clair to Miami. Robin Lod said in part the reason he came to Chicago is because Greg Berhalter tries to play nice football, and Minnesota didn't play football last season. So, the mood in Minnesota, I think, is going to be interesting to watch. I think, though, we had a brief graphic for the YouTube audience of my overall big predictions for the season. MLS Cup, I'm picking San Diego. You might call me crazy, but I think, again, they showed in the playoffs last year that they've got something about them that home stadium's tough to play in. They just knocked the absolute crap out of Pumas from Liga MX in CONCACAF Champions League. I think they're going to be a really, really strong cup team this season, and I think they're going to, I think they're going to put it all together in the playoffs. Again, I mentioned Shield Miami. I think they're going to, challenge the points record. Spoon is Sporting Kansas City. That's not interesting. They're going to be terrible. I've got the Fire winning MLS Cup. I mean, not MLS Cup. Whoa. Bad. Don't clip that. Don't clip that. I've got the Fire winning the U.S. Open Cup. Dangerous clip there. Sarah, delete that. I've got the Fire winning U.S. Open Cup. I think, this is a
I was going to say, I didn't know we were that good.
No, they're not that good. No. Isn't it like insane that the Fire could challenge for MLS Cup this season? No, but I think it's a year or two too soon for that. Open Cup, though, is a tournament this club cares deeply about. And also, I'm sure they're really annoyed the way last season ended in the Open Cup, which was Omar Gonzalez decided to punch Julian Gressel in the face, and that was the end of that game up in Minnesota. I think, they've got Leagues Cup this year, too. It's going to be a packed schedule for the Fire. The World Cup break condenses everything else out. I think the Fire are really going to prioritize the Open Cup this year, and I think they win it. And I think that's going to be, if the season goes how I think it's going to go, if you've got the Open Cup in hand and you become the first team to win it 6 times, 5 times, 6 times, gotta have to double check that. They would be the team, though, who's won it the most in the history of the competition. So that would be really cool. You've got a stadium that's going to be well underway. And if you finish in the top half of the East playoff picture, get that home field advantage in the opening round. All in all, I think that would be a season you could really, really feel great about and really, get that excitement still going about the future of this team. Because it is really heading in a good direction, I think. On the stadium note, there is apparently dirt being moved around starting this week in terms of, bulldozers and stuff of that nature, just flattening out the dirt and starting that process. Shovels are going in the ground on March 3rd. There's going to be a ribbon cutting ceremony or of some sort for that. We're going to have a CHGO crew out there, including myself, Patrick Norton, who is on our Bears coverage and does a whole bunch of other stuff. And I believe Emma Alperovich, one of our social media gurus around here, is going to be joining us for that as well. So fun content day. Keep an eye out for that. Thank you, Brian, in the chat. Yes, it would be the first MLS team to win 5 Open Cups, not 6. There was some nervousness last year about maybe Seattle. I think it's Seattle and Kansas City who could get there as well. Seattle is obviously a bit more of a threat at the moment than Sporting Kansas City is for that. The Fire's scheduled to start this season at Houston this Saturday. They kind of do a back and forth home and away thing here. They're at Houston on Saturday. Thank goodness that Montreal game next Saturday, home opener on February 28th, isn't in the afternoon, so it's going to be as warm as it reasonably can be. Also, it's nice to get Montreal as your home opener. Fire got to take advantage. That's got to be a game you win, and it would be very nice if that's a game that they made everybody feel better about being out in the cold for, if, they put up 4 or 5, or if somebody recreated the Cal Acosta goal and scored from 50 yards, that would also be acceptable. Then they're at Columbus. That's going to feel a lot like opening day last year where they went to Columbus early in the season. Fire will be hoping that it's a slightly better result this time around. They get another nice, relatively easy home game to start the year, the second home game on March 14th against DC United. And then they go to Philly on Saturday, the 21st of March. It gets interesting after that because after those first 5 games where they go back and forth, the Fire play 5 of their next 6 matches at home. Now, that is in part because they try to keep it lighter at the end of the year because of potential Soldier Field conflicts. Again, thank goodness we are only a couple years away from never having to care about that literally ever again. But the Fire, again, if they can get through this early 5-game run where there's 3 away matches, if they can get some points on the board here early, especially in those home matches, and then have that kind of home stretch, there's a chance for the Fire to be, feeling really, really good about themselves come early mid-May as we start to approach that World Cup break. Because again, the Fire are a team who are going to probably lose some guys for the World Cup. I mean, Mboazi is the obvious kind of shoo-in. He starts for South Africa. If he's healthy, he will be there. Again, I'm hoping Chris Brady is there, but that feels very borderline. Anton Soletros for Sweden, he kind of mentioned that part of his motivation for leaving AIK and coming to the Fire was because it's a World Cup year. So he seems to think that playing for Greg Berhalter and playing in MLS is good for his World Cup odds. Sweden do still have to qualify. Those qualifiers coming up in March. So I'm going to be really interested to see if he gets a call in for those. Other than that, it's kind of anybody's guess. If Philip Zinkernagel keeps absolutely killing it, can he sneak into the Denmark squad? Seems like a long shot, but I guess it's theoretically possible. Andrew Gutman trying to get back in the USMNT picture. It's probably too late for that. So, the Fire are going to lose a couple of guys, but if they can be in the top 5 in the Eastern Conference heading into the World Cup break and really kind of get everybody fit and healthy, figure out what they want to do with that last DP spot, whether it's Lewandowski or somebody else, tweak the roster in any particular ways. I think this is a team that, given the added depth, if they can, be well positioned at the break, will feel really good about the run-in the back half of the season headed toward the playoffs. That's about all we've got today, I think, for this edition of CHGO Fire. We'll be back in a couple of weeks, which means we will have seen the Houston and the Montreal games. By that time, hopefully that show will be one where we are talking about a whole bunch of goals against CF Montreal. But it's just great to be back for another season of the Fire, another season of CHGO Fire. And it's great that all of you listening and watching are back with us. Really do appreciate you spending some time either of your Tuesday afternoon or wherever you are listening to spend some time here with me on CHGO Fire. Always really thankful to have the platform I've got and to have the Fire fan community supporting. Hopefully this is a really fun year we've got ahead. Thanks to Sarah on the ones and twos behind the scenes, making this all go. I'm Alex Campbell. I'll see you next time on CHGO Fire.
We all silly like the mayor.